traditions update their works. Another philosopher we'd call is Fritjof Schuon, a Swiss intellectual, profound guy. And then René Guénon in France would be the sort of equivalent. And I was taught, well, I taught alongside, but I learned immensely from Dr. Zaki Badawi, who founded the Muslim College, who was trained at the Al-Azhar University in Cairo. And I just tear my hair out at the nonsense of the bombing of Muslims in Gaza. I mean, we should be talking and having study seminars and learning with our friends in the Palestinian community, who are the inheritors of all this. I've met Palestinian intellectuals who know all the stuff that I'm talking about. The rector of the East Jerusalem University, the Arabic University of Jerusalem, is Professor Sari Nusseibeh. His sister was a friend of mine in London doing peace meetings of Jews and Arabs talking to each other, Palestinians and Israelis. And Sari Nusseibeh wrote the definitive study of the history of Aristotle and Aristotelian thought in the Arabic intellectual world. You know, the guy's a genius. Why? And he is friends with Israeli intellectuals trying to make peace dialogue. Why? You know, where did we go wrong? I don't know. It seems to me the mob have taken over the institutions of the state and even academia. True intellectuals are not properly honoured in academia. It seems to me it's become a sort of gravy train for you know, money spinning, whereas it should be about knowledge searching. Anyway, that's my summary of this wonderful tradition in Islam, of Islamic philosophy, that I've had the chance to meet some of it. Another great contemporary is Sayyid Hossein Nasr, Persian philosopher, Muslim intellectual, who ran the Tehran Academy of Philosophy back in the 60s, 70s, and he then went to Harvard. He teaches there still. A genius. I met him in London. You know, these people are the true voice of true Islam. What we did, what the West did, was by weaponizing the most extreme Muslims as to sort of fight the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. We weaponized Taliban types, taught them how to blow things up, taught them that, you know, that's fine, guerrilla warfare. But it would have been a much better strategy to actually work with the other types of Muslims, who were the intellectuals, the moderates, the non-violent people, and work on an intellectual map of peace, including Islam, but also including all the other cultures in the world. And it's a mistake that was made in American and British intelligence circles by thinking, well, we'll just... It's as if... well, actually, now here's an interesting thought. I was going to say it's as if somebody weaponized the least intelligent, most backward Christian theologians from the Appalachians in America and turned them into like a Taliban type force. Well, actually, that's what's happened. And this is like possibly Putin's ironic blowback against the West, because what's happened in America is like weaponizing the least intelligent theological traditions of America, the most backward. The kind of Taliban of the US have now seized power in Washington, and but anyway, hey, that's another story. But that's
maybe it's turning with the BRICS getting independent, and who knows?
It's interesting to watch history, isn't it, unfolding. And anyway, that's my one. Now your one that you chose. Let's move on to that.
167.
Ah. Gosh, this is kind of yes, this is a brilliant choice. We haven't had this, I don't think, before. So when I was teaching and trained as a teacher in schools, I'd obviously worked as an academic as well. I just love education. That's why I do these philosophy clubs. Right? I think education is the key to peace. And that's why I took on the job of creating a Peace Studies Institute at the University of London. It's why I bothered with my degrees.
There is one point, maybe now or later you may speak about, is that most famous educators, they didn't write books. It was only a oral transmission. It's a kind of mystery for me.
Yeah.
Maybe there is something behind that. that the truth cannot be transmitted. Well, of course, books. I like books very much. Don't misunderstand me. But the best way is face to
Orally,
face.
yeah.
Even with no speaking, but face to face, the transmission can be done.
Yeah,
And that,
sure. I agree. I mean, yes. I mean, it's a paradox I had for many years. I mean, in Tibet, it is said, in the Buddhist schools of Tibet, when they were still functioning, and the pupils had reached a certain level, there were 3 types of exams they had to do to test their knowledge. The first type was a written exam, right? They had to answer questions in Tibetan writing. The next was an oral exam, where they couldn't fudge it. They had to either know the stuff or not. And the third was a silent telepathic exam, where they would sit in silence and they would have to answer questions telepathically. And that's the highest level of exam. We have in the Christian West and the university system, we have the first 2. We have the written exam and we have the Viva, which is the oral exam. I think we should have the telepathic exam too. So yes, it's a paradox of knowledge. But I think all 3 levels are important. I think when these great teachers that I've mentioned, I think they taught on all 3 levels. And you need the books, I believe, to safeguard against ego inflation, because some people will say, no, I don't need books, I'm a genius channeling from the planet Venus, and I know everything there is to be known, and just listen to me, That's where the books are useful, because I think we need them as a safeguard against deluded messianic, pseudo-messianic charismatics, right? Who and I'm suspicious of people that are anti-books and anti-learning and anti-rationality. I think we need our Aristotle because he teaches a kind of logic that we can weed out.
yeah,
The
it's
fakes.
a kind of paradox because on the other hand, some people they say it's written in the book.
Sure, and only the book matters. Yeah, no, but that's also
So
stupid.
we had a lot that problem of the spirit
pedants.
has disappeared with the letter.
Yeah, no, that's the pedants that sentenced Jesus to death. They were only operating on the book level. I mean, his point was very simple. You have to look at the spirit behind the text, and go with that, which was the Alexandrian Neoplatonic form of Judaism that he followed, and that just didn't sit well with the kind of the literalist schools. But you get that argument in all traditions, even in Western academia, so-called academia, and in the way that science has turned into scientism. In the hands of true scientists like Bacon and the original, it wasn't scientism. I mean, all knowledge is within its domain, and we need a methodology that can weigh the value and veracity of all knowledge. So yes, no, I agree. I think it's all, and I mean, even in the lives of great thinkers, I mean, Thomas Aquinas had this problem because he loved books, he wrote books, he churned them out endlessly. But then he reached a certain level of enlightenment where he realised he couldn't put it into words. And from that moment on, he never wrote a book. He was silent because he reached a level of knowing that was transcendent to literature. But he died soon after, poor chap. He hit his head on a branch on the way to a conference of the church in Lyon. But yes, I think, and as a teacher, it's also, you've got to get people doing stuff, making things, testing geometric shapes with actual patterns and cutting out cardboard and making pottery and doing art, so that true knowledge is about it's an all sensorium type of activity. And appreciating life, because that's the purpose of it. It's not just, I mean, the book is helpful to get us to love life, but love transcends. I mean, Wittgenstein said when you got reached there, you can kick the ladder away. You don't need to take the book up the mountain. Although I want to heavenly library, so I want my cake and eat it. But yes, well, good question. So anyway, yes, and I'm very upset at the way that universities are under attack in Britain. They're shutting theology departments at Aberystwyth or Wales, Lampeter, because they don't make enough money. You know, because Brexit is such a stupid idea, and when you shut the country out of its natural trading partners and travelling students body, it's academia that's going to suffer. So academics in Britain, my dear friends, we have to fight back against Brexit and against this trying to isolate ourselves from Europe. It was an idea dreamed up by madmen and ill-educated people. People like Farage, they don't have a single valid argument or idea to support Brexit. David Cameron unleashed demons from hell to give us Brexit, which was done on egotistical, false economic grounds, at the behest of some very, very rich people. Better late than never is to turn that tide, and Starmer, in my opinion, should reverse that and begin to start making moves back into Europe, as he's doing. Because it's our natural, we are Europeans in Britain and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. And so, okay, that's I could go on, but just to say finally, when I taught at the Institute of Education at the University of London, I felt like a little child in a sweet shop, because the library was full of all these thinkers and all their educational work, histories of Confucianism in Chinese education over the centuries, or in Islamic education. And I discovered there's a whole scholarship of the history of education, which I didn't really know about. And it's profound stuff, comparing and contrasting, say, the way they teach in the Islamic world to the Chinese, to the Christian world, and what are the common best practices and so on. And that led me to develop an interest in how we can teach for peace. Where is peace studies in the history of education? How can it be improved and perfected? And that got me to sit on as an advisor to the International Association of University Presidents, which is a network for the heads of universities. And they were asking, well, that question, how can we teach for peace? What can universities do? And I went twice to New York and spoke at the UN about this. And I have treasured memories. And the work isn't finished. What I would say is the worst thing you can possibly do is what Israel's just done in Gaza, which is bomb the universities. And they've killed over 1,000 scholars, academics, intellectuals, blown up bookshops, blown up libraries, and blown up universities, using this AI automatic system. Now, I think that's inhuman. I think that's way over the top in terms of legitimate revenge for the tragic events of 7th of October. It's totally out of order, and it has to have consequences. There has to be a rebuild in Gaza. Those universities have to come back. People, the world community has to rally round and lament all this and not let it carry on. Trump is saying, "Oh, I'll bomb Iran." These are ignorant people, mobsters, literally gangsters, who've stolen control of our nations.
I'm a little surprised because this is going against common sense. So of course common sense can make in some occasion lose our mind, but I find that I may trust better a farmer for common sense than I graduated guy. In some time, I graduated guy. It seems that's what this is the experience I had with the COVID period.
Right.
Because the COVID period, we had a message from the authority, and graduated people they trust as they trust the authority. They say, okay, we go and say
total
what you are doing. Yes, you say you have scientific arguments and let's go for what you said.
Yeah.
The farmer, is more like watching what is being asked to do,
Yeah.
and he say, "Oh, something goes wrong with that."
Yeah.
You-
His
you-
instinct was
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And the second
To
point,
distrust that,
you
yeah.
make the transition. The experience of education in Japan is quite interesting, even in our civilization for craftsmanship,
Right.
apprentissage en français.
Yes. Yes.
And you are not told what to do. You have to observe to make a game, and then
Right. You sit with a master and watch what they
yes,
do.
and
then
it
copy.
raises intuition. That's
Ah.
very interesting, especially in Japan. They do
Right.
that way, and if these disciples they are doing common washing the floor or the dishes,
Yeah.
but they are
Watching
with the
what they
master,
do. Yeah.
and they watch. They cannot ask a question at the beginning, even.
Right.
But it raises also there is a question of greediness for knowledge to improve ourselves. Or if you give me the access, we'll have maybe that problem with AI, because as soon as I have the question, I can get the answer.
Yeah.
That's too quick. Before
Sure.
we had
You have to walk to the library and
go
learn how to read.
yeah. Maybe you find a book,
Spend
maybe not that
years.
time,
Yeah.
but next time. So
you
you're
learn
really
patience.
greedy to
Yeah.
patient and very greedy to
Yes.
catch.
Yes. Those are both really important points that you raise, and the first one I'd say about this the learned idiot, you know, the guy with all the degrees, all the qualifications, doctor, this, scientist, blah blah blah, but actually can't like tie their own shoelace up, and that is a problem. And to me, it's when you say it's against common sense. So what Israel's done in Gaza, which to me symbolizes all this. Let's use it as a test case, right? It's the worst mass slaughter of human beings in a prison camp that ever happened since the Holocaust. I don't know, numbers, but and it wasn't done by humans. This is the incredible thing. We've created AI, thinking we're clever. So high-tech geniuses in Israel, all with degrees from universities, probably from America and whatever, the Technion in Haifa. They've created this AI that can now mass slaughter human beings on false pretenses with no ethical checks whatsoever. They've created a monster robot, like a Frankenstein thing, that, if unleashed, can destroy an entire culture like Gaza is. If it was unleashed anywhere, Tehran, anywhere, it'll do the same. Now, and they sit back and think, we're really clever, we've invented this thing. Well, I'd say that shows a failure of education, a failure of science, and a failure of technology, because what's happened is, it's like the golem, which is one of the worst fears of the Jewish mind, creating a robot that can take over and take over from the human. It's an idolatry we created, which is, look, we're really clever, we've created AI, look what it can do, it can destroy Gaza, But that is idolatry. That's exactly what the biblical tradition I follow as a, humanist Christian believer in rationality and common sense would say is against all that. It's the antithesis of what Christ was teaching, or any of the rabbis I've ever met, or any of the proper rabbis of all history have ever said. So we've ended up with very smart, educated people who are attacking education. Their idea of being clever is to destroy universities, to hunt down academics with facial recognition. Oh, there's Professor Bang Bang. That is, as you say, it lacks common sense, but it's worse than that. It's an inversion of all values.
But it was very surprising to see that. For me, it was really the year before and the year after. I could see it's possible. Wow, gosh.
Well, I didn't know people were that evil and stupid. I didn't think that could happen. But and when I discovered that it was actually AI doing it all, and the people were just sort of like pressing the buttons,
No.
it kind of makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, but I
But
could
how can we rein that in?
when I was young, I was taught the history of Second World War, and I was wondering. I guess you was the same.
Yeah,
How can the German people, so smart people and dedicated people,
right.
how can they join this war and this leader? How can they?
How could they put up with it and tolerate it? Yeah. And how could they do the Holocaust?
Not understandable in my head.
Yeah, sure.
But okay, not understandable. But I was not born at that time, fortunately.
Sure.
And I could not receive testimonies from that area. But now I have lived the era of COVID-19 hoax, I would say.
Okay.
And I'm sorry,
Sort of
it's
imposition
partisan,
of mass
but
delusions.
yeah.
Yeah.
For-
And so now you see it's more easy
Yeah.
to delude a whole
I
population.
was very surprised
Well,
because we had the experience of before. Furthermore, maybe the German they didn't have before such a mass manipulation.
I think, it's a complicated question, isn't it? But a lot of the details of the Holocaust were obviously kept from the average German. They didn't know it was happening. And it was done deliberately. Nothing was put in writing. Hitler gave oral instructions, which is another reason why it's good to have it in writing, because he was able to manipulate orality for his devious methods. Yeah, I did study World War II in depth in the University of London as part of my degree, and it's shocking what was done. And I never thought I'd be living in a Europe where it was sort of starting again, where some of those ideas were coming back, and creating a sort of MAGA movement in America which is premised on them. I'm utterly shocked. But I think I go back to Camus in La Peste. The very ending of La Peste, the plague, is that the bacillus from which it came is still hiding in the drawers. We think it's gone, but it can come back at any time. I mean, it's his novel about a plague that hits, I think, a North African town, but it's a metaphor for fascism and extreme right-wing nonsense, which is sad because true conservatism had some intelligent ideas, but this stuff doesn't. So that's yes, the first point, and the the other point about how we learn. I think learning has got to be a lot to do with inspiration, which is left out of the classroom now because it's all becoming robotized. I was a marker and examiner, marking people's works. It's all done on computers now. The examiner just touches a button and clicks, and the computer trundles the data. There's very little room for actual intuitive writing and intuitive examining. Students can write an inspired and brilliant answer to a question, but if it doesn't hit the rubric, they get low marks, you see. And the rubric is set by the computer model. Whereas I've always argued as a teacher that actually it's teachers that should teach and examine. That's why I created the Global Green University as an autonomous, independent university outside of the robot control system. And I believe in actual intellecting, which is Abelard's word.
It's one of the project.
It is. We'll choose that another time, maybe. Yeah. Okay, let's finish with our tarot of the gods. Let's see what the gods make of all this, because they're part of this story. They're our collective human, if you want to call them projections, that's fine, over the eons. Or maybe we're the gods' projections. Maybe it works both ways. We shall see who wants to join the conversation.
Oh, I took two.
Okay, put back. There we are. And then I'll let you give me a choice. just taking that one. Right. Ooh. Okay. Oh. Right. Well. Interesting. Yes. So we'll start with your one, the Knight of Air. Now, the Knight of Air is yeah. Let's take these. Thank you. Is a god from Latin America, Quetzalcoatl, the Knight of Air. If you think about the air, what is the air? I mean, it's amazing. We wouldn't be here without air and breath, and also it's space. It's what we're having all this play in, this field of activity that we're doing, called life. But we're polluting it with weapons. We're sending drones around. We're, potentially, we are sending missiles and rockets at each other. And the air isn't really happy about this. Nobody's asked the air, do you really want to be the bearer of all this nonsense? And then if you think about the airwaves, all the messages that are going around on the internet, the media, the television, a lot of them are lies and provocations and disinformation. So who's going to sort all this out? Well, it's the Knight of Air, obviously. He's a knight, and he is Quetzalcoatl, which means a feathered serpent. He was one of the very most important gods of the Latin American Aztec people. It's it's a term in Nahuatl language. The serpent of precious feathers. And it also seems to be related to the idea of the Kundalini, because the serpent within the human form is the energy that we are made of. It's our internal energy. We'd call it Qi in Chinese. Qigong works with that and so on. And so does the Kundalini idea in Hindu Tantrism and Buddhist Tantrism. When you elevate the Kundalini to its highest form, it flowers, and in their understanding, it becomes the feathered headdress of Quetzalcoatl. So it seems to be likely that the ancient Latin American Indians were exploring the same phenomenology of religious experience that they had in India and China. So this is the Kundalini eye. Now, Quetzalcoatl was banished by his sort of enemies, and they tried to kill him several times. This is the legend. And he was eventually banished off in a ship, and it was said that that's the end of him. But the story says that he will come back, and he's going to return to guide mankind back to an age of love. And
in the future?
Well, when those texts were first written down, that was kind of 500, 600 years ago. They thought that the Cortes and the conquistadores were representatives of Quetzalcoatl. They thought he'd come back to help them. They were, sadly, they brought guns and sexual diseases and all the catastrophes. But they also brought Christ, and some of the wisest of the Aztec intellectuals said, we can accept that you may be representatives of